notion that you should die twice, but not sense of vengeance, weathered and were true. When I saw what remained, I shot into the room.
You are listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. On this episode, we are discussing Laughing Stock. The song appeared as a flexi 7-inch with the deluxe edition of Victory Lap on Epitaph Records. The song does not appear on the digital version of the deluxe edition of the album, which does include Technocracy Beyond and Wishing. The song is available digitally as a standalone single.
Do you have the flexi?
I don't have the flexi. Yeah.
I have it. I have a copy of the flexi.
Obviously, you have it.
Yeah, I have everything. I think well, I don't have any of the cassettes really, like the demos and stuff like that, but this is one of those records that I think a lot of people don't even know this song exists, don't even know this flexi exists. The record's not currently available on Epitaph's online store, so I guess Laughing Stock as a physical copy is now out of print, but I really have no idea.
The you can listen to. I listened to the song this morning before we recorded on. So it's on Tidal. I know that.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah, it's on the usual streaming services, but I was a little surprised whenever I went to listen to it and it wasn't tacked on to the deluxe edition of the Victory Lap LP. But it's just a standalone single that came out a couple of years after Victory Lap came out, and it at one point was a part of their live set in the last days of Beeve being in the band, but then it just kind of was forgotten about, it seems like. But, what is your history with this song? Do you have any sort of like real connection to this thing at all?
I don't have any connection outside of knowing the story of what the song is about and how it was a very, very dark day in a time in the history of Canada.
Yeah, and so this is the topic. We'll get into it. I'll tell a little bit of the backstory and things like that. But this is one of those things that growing up in like Missouri in the US and the Midwest, these are one of those types of Canadian stories that I never knew about. Like I never knew the story of, the Oka Kanasatake standoff in Quebec. You know what I mean? Growing up, I had no idea that even existed, but everybody in Canada knew it existed for like an entire summer. This is a song about another Canadian story that completely eluded me. Do you have any recollection of this being like on the news or anything like that whenever you were younger when it was first happening?
No, I'm pretty sure that the timeline of when it happened was when I was extremely young. It was 1983, I think, right? Yeah.
It was the 90s. It was the
It was
early
the
90s. So it was like
nine
92,
92.
92,
I
93.
thought it was 83 for some reason. Anyways, 92. So I would have been 12 years old. Um, you know, I did at the time I didn't really know because like I'm 12 years old. I was a literal idiot when I was 12 years old. Not that I'm not now, but like I remember the Oka situation because it was like basically in our backyard.
Yeah,
So
down the street.
it was down the street. So I remember living that. But this, I think I was just too young and not informed at the time to really remember any of this.
So, Steve, something about this song is that there's really no good way to talk about a song like this. The content is extremely heavy. So, in order to kick the episode off in a slightly enjoyable way before I feel like I'm going to bum everybody out for a little bit, I was
Well,
wondering if you felt like it was okay if we started the episode with a cover
yeah,
before we talk about the tune.
I think we should start with the cover, but I think before the cover, we should just do our little. We haven't done a recap in a while. We did one kind of
Ooh,
the other day when
when you were in my
when I
house
was
for 10
briefly in your
minutes.
house for 10 minutes and we recorded an episode, but we haven't done one. I don't even, to be perfectly honest, prior to that, I don't even remember the last time we recorded an episode.
It's been ages. Let me look at my calendar here. I'm pulling up my calendar to see what I've been up to lately. So I got a new roof on my garage
That's super
recently.
exciting. It looks good.
It was very fun. I went to see the band Counterpunch from Chicago here in Buffalo. They're on Thousand Islands Records. They used to be on Cybertracks, that record label that Aaron from No Effect or El Jefe from No Effects used to run. So I saw them here in Buffalo. I did a really cool episode on, and we thought that nation states were a bad idea with a longtime friend of the podcast, Dr. Chris Deutsch.
Awesome episode.
That was a fun one, man. So fun. Chris, I told him I was like, okay, let's like just be as uh extremely in-depth and nerdy about every single word in the lyrics as possible, and that will really make the episode better. So we did that. And I had a really, really good time with it. Trying to think of what else I've done recently. I bought tickets for the Protest the Hero show coming to Buffalo here in a few months, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Nice.
Um, and I'm doing a big series over at my other podcast where I'm interviewing a lot of professors for a series, but having fun with that. Just doing the whole massive cycling rampage
And you
thing
got a new
around
bike,
Buffalo. I got a brand new bike.
which I saw, and Greg said, "No, my bike is not very light. The bike is super light, everyone."
It's a nice bike, but it's a very mid-range road bike made by a company called Canyon. I've been riding a lot. I've been hitting about 150 to 200 miles a week for about the last 6 weeks. And so I've been just very, very outdoors. One of the things I realized about cycling is when I look back at like my years in college and stuff when I was riding a lot, I don't really ever recall any like dark periods, so to speak. Like I was like just super happy all the time. And so a couple years ago here in Buffalo, I kind of figured out that like if I reincorporate a lot of cycling into my life, my mood just skyrockets. So we've had a pretty warm and sunny spring, so I've just been really taking advantage of that and riding my bike as much as possible, which leads to much less podcasting, but maybe that's not a bad thing because being away from one's computer is a pretty important thing that I've reincorporated a lot into my life lately.
Absolutely. And like I let's just tell people, hey, we're on summer hours for the podcast.
I totally agree. So what about you guys? What kind of stuff you got going on?
So I think the last time we actually recorded together, other than the 10 minutes in your house earlier this week, was the Blind Guardian episode.
Oh yeah, that. We did Blind Guardian and we did
We,
that song Bent about sudden impact.
yes, we did those. And then so I was pretty much from Blind Guardian up until last week, I was sick for
Yeah, you were
almost a
sick
full
for
month.
ages.
For almost a full month. But last we talked about it briefly the other day, but I was at Tied Down in Detroit last week. For those that don't know, it's just like an annual hardcore fest. It's one of the big festivals. It's the best run festival that I've ever been to. 18 bands a day, ran ahead of schedule. Day
Mm,
two, 9:20, I was out of the building.
yeah, that's a dream.
That's in my opinion, the perfect festival. I had a balcony spot right next to the stage with a chair for most of the time.
Even better. I'm very
So
much a fan of the chairs at shows these days.
like it's not really the in the spirit of going to a hardcore show, but let me tell you, this guy was pretty jazzed to be sitting in a chair for a show that was 12 and a half hours long.
Yeah, Steve,
So
we're in our 40s, you know.
yeah, I will be 44 years old next week by the time
Well,
this episode comes out.
happy birthday. Maybe we'll release Laughing Stock on your birthday as a wonderful birthday present to you.
Oh, thank you. Um, but yeah, Tied Down was awesome. Have Heart was maybe the best set I've seen ever by any
Yeah, I
band.
mean, dude, and you know what's so crazy? I'm a relatively new fan to Have Heart, but I was like I've been reading their lyrics so much lately, and I was like, you know what, man? Someone should do a song by song breakdown podcast about Have Heart. And I was like, oh man, what if we finish this Propagandhi podcast and we made a Have Heart podcast next? Because bands with tiny discographies,
Yeah,
you could do the entire discography in like a year,
yeah. So
and you
spoiler
could,
alert, it's probably gonna be us, but we'll fit.
I mean, I'm kind of down, it could be a really interesting experience. For a long time I thought I'd wind up doing a Dillinger Ford podcast after this, but like I don't know, man. I'm
Have
feeling the
Heart.
Have Heart lately.
Yeah, so Have Heart were unbelievable. Other standouts from the weekend. I really, really loved Twitching Tongues.
Hmm.
They were so good. Um, Angel Dust was awesome. It was I'd never really been into Angel Dust before, but seeing them live was great. I really like Gates to Hell. Man, Gates to Hell used 808s in like three times a song.
Mm.
It was awesome. But yeah, overall, great festival. We really dialed in the Detroit situation. We got a really good place in the Ferndale neighborhood, so we got to experience Detroit Pride,
Cool.
which was really good as well. Our favorite restaurant called Space Cat is in that area, so it was just an all-around very enjoyable experience. Then we took the long way back. We drove, met up with you in Buffalo, hit Wegmans,
Yeah,
and then
Wegmans.
Wegmans and Trader Joe's, and then came back home. It was perfect.
Love it. Well, I see you've got the Propagandhi Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes on the turntable back there as well.
Yeah, that's the one you so generously gifted me a few weeks ago.
That's the gold copy. Perfect. Love to see it out there getting some spins and some love. Perfect. Um, well, that's really all I got. Should we hear this cover?
Yeah, let's hear the cover and then let's get real sad after that.
Okay, so this cover was made by a pal from Canada named Darren, and I met Darren at I believe it was the London, Ontario Propagandhi show in 2021. Or no, 22. It was the spring of 22. But he did a cover for our Potemkin City Limits episode. We did a 5-hour episode about that song a couple years ago now. But so Darren is back with a new cover for Laughingstock. But when I say new cover, I mean I've been sitting on this cover for 2 years and we've just never done this episode. So the cover you're about to hear is very old at
It's
this point.
aged very well though.
It's delightful. So
It's
we're going to hear
ripe.
Darren's cover of Laughingstock, and then we'll be back and we'll talk about the Somalia affair and Master Corporal Clayton Matchy and Shadane Arone and more. So here we go. Thank you to Darren for providing the cover 2 years ago that I finally get to put out.
I reveled in the news of your about suicide. Seems such fitting fortune that you should die twice. But my sense of vengeance weathered and withdrew when I saw what remained ushered into the room. A funhouse reflection of the sadistic strapping thought that was darker, deformed, now drooling through that simmering smile, that pure-eyed grin for the camera crew. I stared long and hard, but I could find no trace of the piece of human shit that tortured, killed, and raped Shadane Arone. Wrong time, wrong place. He was 16 years old. They say you reap what you sow. Sometimes I force myself to rifle through the images, so I believe that too. The fool seeks retribution, the fool leaves speaking penitence. Forgive me, I know not what I do. Laughing stock.
begin to form the drooling through a simmering smile. The pure green for the camera crew. I stared long and hard, but I could find the trace of the piece of human shit that tortured, killed, and raped. Shit ain't alone. Wrong time, wrong place.
All right. So thank you so much to Darren for that cover. What a
Killer
delightful
cover.
Listen. Yep,
Killer.
very good. It's
He's got
just
he's got a great voice.
yeah, it's almost like Iron and Wine does Propagandhi. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
just I love the finger picking and I love the gentle lyrical vocal delivery. Beautiful.
It's like, have you ever heard the Local H cover of Last Caress?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It reminds me of that.
love it. Well, so Steve, how much do you know about this Somalia affair? Like, what stands out to you about the topic of this song?
I mean, that was a horrific incident. But I think the thing that stands out to me the most is kind of the way it was handled and the aftermath, and essentially the everything around like the narrative surrounding the medication, I think, is the
Mhm.
thing that stands out the most to me, because it essentially prevented any type of closure from happening.
Yeah. And so I was brand new to this. So I had to start my research on this very simply. I went to genius.com, and friend of the podcast, Patrick Mullen, did a really nice annotation there that said a reaction song about Master Corporal Clayton Matchey, who was involved in the Somalia affair after seeing him post attempted suicide. Originally referred to as Matchy when played live ahead of the release of Victory Lap, of which this was a bonus track on a flexi provided with deluxe editions of the album. So here we have a couple things that Patrick lays out. We got the name, Master Corporal Clayton Matchey. We have the incident, the Somalia affair, and we have a mentioned suicide attempt, right? So we've got three major things going on here in that. So, do you want me to go through like a little overview of what was going on in the early 90s leading to this
Yeah.
situation with
Some
Matchy?
sum it up for everyone, because I'm sure there's going to be a large chunk of our 5 listeners that maybe have never heard of this before.
Right. So 3 out of 5 of people don't know anything about this,
No.
I bet. So here's a basic
Congratulations on the
overview.
other 2, though.
Yeah, well, those two probably live in Canada for one. Okay, so
One of them's name is Paul.
so
The other
Hi,
one's
Paul.
name is Jamie.
Jamie and Paul are two Canadian listeners. So we've got Mohammed Siad Barre was president of Somalia from 1969 to 1991, and then he was forced out, right? So then competition for that vacuum of power emerges between two groups led by Ali Mahdi Mohammed and Mohammed Farah Adid. Hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed in this power struggle, and Mahdi Mohammed was declared president. 350,000 people died by 1992 from disease and starvation. So this famine in 92 is important for how Canada becomes involved. So the UN steps in and approves something called Operation Restore Hope, which included the US, Canadian, and Pakistani troops. Canada's involvement began officially on December 3rd, 1992, when 1,400 troops were deployed from Canada to Somalia. Relief convoys were frequently attacked by the Somali leadership, and there were regular attempts to break into bases for the Canadian and American and Pakistani troops. So any attempt by a Somali person to break into one of these bases was reclassified as sabotage, which basically, from what I can tell, authorized the use of deadly force to retaliate, which obviously becomes important. So in March of 1993, 2 Somalis were shot in the back by Canadian soldiers after attempting to break into the military base, and one who was named Ahmed Aroush dies. So when kids would get caught stealing by the Canadian Airborne Regiment, they would tie them up and like put signs around their neck saying thief and things like that. So there was a lot of tension going on between the people who lived surrounding these bases where these UN or this UN Operation Restore Hope was based. So here's where Shadain Arone comes in.
It's kind of interrupt quickly.
Sure.
It's it's ironic that all of these operations have such inspirational names, but they all produce such horrific outcomes.
Yeah. Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Sounds great, but you know.
So Arone comes into the story, and Arone is listed in the song by Chris in the lyrics for Laughingstock. Shadain Arone, wrong place, wrong time. He was 16 years old. So a week after Arush's death, 16-year-old Shadain Arone is discovered by Captain Michael Stocks hiding in an abandoned American base across from the Canadian base. And it was assumed that he was a saboteur. This is what the explanation was. Who knows if that was actually true. He was captured and tied up, blindfolded, beaten severely, and burned with cigars for hours by Clayton Matchey and Kyle Brown. Canadian troops were in earshot of this torture and violence, but ignored it, and Arone dies in custody. The soldiers involved took trophy photos, which are also listed kind of in the lyrics of the song. The soldiers were arrested, and Matchey tried to hang himself in his cell. And Matchey was brain damaged in the botched suicide and was declared unfit to stand trial. 8 soldiers who were involved were court-martialed. 4 were convicted. 1 was sentenced to 5 years and served 2. So that's a little bit of the situation involving Arone and Matchey and Kyle Brown. And the real crux of the song hinges around the fact that after Matchey is involved in the death of Arone, he tries to kill himself and is brain damaged. So basically it is impossible, as you said earlier, for anyone in the Arone family to get closure on the matter, because one of the people who was involved, seriously involved, is like not the former full version of himself, which is also talked about in the song. So is that making sense so far?
Yep.
Okay. So there are obviously a lot of incidents. There were more incidents where like rifles are confiscated from Somali people, large groups return to get it back, conflict breaks out between the soldiers and the groups. And so you mentioned earlier the narrative around the drug side effects. So in the last several years, there's been the story of how the soldiers were prescribed an anti-malarial drug called mefloquine leading up to the deployment, which has been stated in defense of the soldiers to cause severe neurologic and psychiatric effects. I personally went to the Mayo Clinic's website, and the medication has a ton of information on it on the website. It seems like it's still available today. And under the quote, rare, unquote, side effects list, it says confusion and hallucinations. Because I kept seeing these videos online of the situation where it was just this drug being blamed for these breaks in their sanity, essentially. And so I was like going and looking at the side effects on Mayo Clinic's website, and that's what I found. So there are documentaries online, so many interviews, so many short documentaries referring to the soldiers as guinea pigs and lab rats for the medication. And the soldiers now report that they were having problems with the drugs the whole time and refer to the day they would get their regular dose as, quote, Psycho Tuesday. And the wife of Clayton Matchey, who was interviewed extensively in videos on YouTube that any listener of this podcast can find, said his behavior was drastically altered around the deployment after he began taking the medication, which wasn't yet approved for use in Canada at the time. And if you watch the documentaries, there are answers for literally everything that went down. And many soldiers are given airtime to defend themselves. Nearly every source I'm finding for video overviews on YouTube now seem to mention the soldiers being strung out or incapacitated. 1,000 soldiers sued the Canadian government in 2017 for the use of the drug. And I'm personally not a doctor. I know nothing about dosages. I don't know anything about this kind of stuff. I simply do not know what these soldiers were and were not allegedly experiencing during this time period. But a teenager was murdered by people who were sent there to a country on the other side of the world to act as peacekeepers during a famine. And, you know, multiple people died. So this is like the major crux of the situation as I understand it. And I tried to look at it on both sides of the issue and to kind of get a fuller picture of what was going on. And I did watch a bunch of the interviews and documentaries about the Somalia affair on YouTube. And it was just, trying to inform myself as best I could about this very horrific and challenging story.
It's so hard because, at the end of the day, like we will never know. And that's part of what makes this such a tragic situation is because there's no form of closure on any side.
Exactly, exactly. And the dilemma presented in the song and in the lyrics is so interesting. It's like it's a really crazy tune. But what I did is I reached out to the band for comment on the song, and I reached out to listeners of this podcast for some comments. So do you want to hear some of the things that I was told about the tune and
I,
some of the thoughts of listeners?
yeah, I'm really curious about this.
So back in the day, I used to do voicemails for this podcast. If you listen to like the first like 15 or 20 episodes, I used to include recordings of people who would call into like this old Google voicemail line that I had. And it'd be cool to do that again for some of the last episodes, with the original 7 LP discography. But on Laughingstock, Chris Hanna says, "What a convoluted and sad story. I think the thing that stands out to me most about that recording is that we didn't quite do it justice. I feel like it was given a bit of an afterthought kind of treatment toward the end of the session, like we had already decided it wouldn't be on the record before it was done or something. I can't quite remember if that's the case or not, but it sounds like it. Do you feel like this song is, do you resonate with what Chris says? Do you feel like this song is kind of an afterthought or like not fully formed out or whatever?"
I mean, I'll get to my thoughts on the actual like recording of the song and everything later, but like I do think this song deserved more, just more. Like I think it deserved to be on a record. I think it's an important story that people need to hear, and I don't think it was released in a way that does the subject matter of the song justice.
I totally agree. And this is a song that I don't come back to super often, but I kind of almost wish that if they didn't feel good about this recording, that they would have just not released the single and then held it for the next album and then tweaked it, figured
Yeah.
out the things that weren't working for them that caused them to leave it off a record. Don't release it until it's fully ready, because you don't need to release a single in 2019. You just don't. So I kind of wish that they would just sat on this tune until the record that they're working on now and released a version that did the song justice. Because the topic is something that a lot of people can learn from, but they most likely won't because who's listening to streaming stuff or flexi singles? You know what I mean?
Yeah, like it deserves a similar treatment to the Oka to Oka Everywhere. Like it's a song, like a very impactful song about a really dark day in Canadian history, and a lot of maybe younger people may not know about this. So
Yeah.
I think it's important.
Well, Beeve and Sulin also replied. So Sulin says it was really fun to play live, and I learned it really early into playing it live with them. So this is one of the ones that when Sulin joined the band, this song was actually in the live set. In the first go arounds with Sulin on guitar. And Beeve says the music for the song goes way back to 2006 when I joined the band. I remember being influenced by Hot Snakes on that one. and for a while we referred to the song as Hot Snack. Chris and I were constantly sharing riffs with each other, and that was one of the first I sent him. It was a fairly complete song, music-wise. Took several years before it got any attention, though. If memory serves, I played the solo, a rare moment in the spotlight for me. And then he wrote back later and he said, actually, I just listened to it for the first time in ages, and I'm recalling that this was one of the songs we were working on when I left the band. I think we even played it live a bit. Since my leaving, there were many tweaks to the arrangement that I had to learn before meeting up with them in the studio to record it. I forgot why it was left off the album. So apparently Beav is on this song on the recording as well because he is in the studio for Victory Lap, even though he was technically not in the band anymore at that point. He still played on the record. So those are Beav, Chris, and Sue Lynn's memories about this particular tune.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then I went on Discord and I asked folks what they thought about Laughing Stock because, so we're so far into this podcast that sometimes I'm just tired of hearing my own thoughts. So I was like, what do you guys think about this song? So Danik says, Laughing Stock absolutely rips. It's been on my workout playlist for years. I love hearing those opening guitar stabs while exercising. And I relate to the ethical internal conflict of Schadenfreude. So for those of you who don't know out there, Schadenfreude is when pleasure is derived from another person's misfortune. So in the lyrics, Chris finds himself experiencing glee almost that Matchy had like tried to kill himself but failed. So the opening line is like very very disturbing lyric. Whenever I realized what he was saying, that is a pretty shocking lyric. I reveled in the news of your botched suicide. Like, wow, that's really intense. So Danik really connects to the Schadenfreude of this tune, which is one of the most complicated aspects of the story being told. Is seeing what happens with Matchy later. And thinking about where he was, what he did, and then what became of him, and then trying to reconcile our own thoughts on the matter internally, knowing that, like you said earlier, there's no closure. Jamie says it's the first new song they played live after Failed States. The structure of it changed slightly from one or two of the early videos. So Jamie, if you go look at 2014 versions, it's a little different here and there. Somebody else said it's such a disturbing story. Not the story of the song restructuring, but the true story behind the lyrics. And then Nim said, never heard the song a lot, so I couldn't even remember what it sounded like from the top of my head, but I agree it rips. First half being in a lighter melodic punk tone that would have fit perfectly onto Victory Lap, similarly to Failed Imagineer, or it could have went somewhere in the middle of supporting cast. The song does take quite a dark turn in the middle, though, where it gives me strong, cold, heavy Failed States vibes. The riff goes into a bit of a direction of the thrashy songs like Status Update or Rattan Cane, but then you have these high-pitched guitar leads sprinkled in that remind me a lot of Dark Matters. Definitely need to play this one more. This has potential for a Victory Lap era favorite. Ooh, interesting. So so Nim is like, this one could be a favorite of the era, which I haven't heard before. Any thoughts on the comments so far from the listeners?
I love hearing what people have to say. So it's way better than hearing what we have to say.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I asked him. I was like, you guys are smart. Tell me what you think. So our friend Matt said, just want to highlight how mind-meltingly insane it is that this is a song that fell through the cracks. Imagine having this song ready to go and opting out of adding it to a release. Their leftovers are tastier than most bands' entire catalogs.
Which Matt was that?
Milkowski, I'm sure.
That sounded like a Milkowski joint.
So, Steve, do you think, is there a song on Victory Lap that you would take off in favor of this one?
I wouldn't take anything off. I would just add one. Like, what do we have to take one off?
Oh, you would just make it a 13-song album?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, okay, cool. So John says, This was a major part of their live set for a couple of years, so it was pretty jarring to find that it hadn't made the cut on Victory Lap, at least not the standard edition. It's a great song, and it prompted me to learn a bit about the Somalia affair, a very dark and upsetting real life story. I appreciate the way Chris expresses the nuances of his feelings towards Clayton Matchey, following the brain damage Matchey sustained in a failed attempt to end his own life. I wish Propaganda had found a way to get the song to the point where it made the album so that it got the attention it deserves, both as a song and as an issue for consideration, which I think really grooves with what your thoughts are on it.
Absolutely. I think that's a spot on comment. Thank you, John.
Yeah, and John, I should say, also is the person who does the cover artworks for virtually all of our episodes these days. So if you go on Instagram and look at the episode cover arts, that's John. John sings and plays bass in a great punk band in the UK called Zero Cost. And they've also contributed several covers to this podcast, including my personal favorite of theirs is their acoustic cover of Tartuffe that they did.
Yeah, they're awesome.
So
And John is an absolute the man for doing that. Like,
absolutely.
come on.
He's done covers. He was on our he did a I did a Rio San Atlanta cover. And he was a guest on the Tartuffe episode. Loved John. He's a great dude. Go check out Zero Cost too. They're a good band. Someone sent in an anonymous comment that I really enjoyed. It seems to tie to the lyric about the Schadenfreude too. And they said, I don't like the idea of reveling in the news of a suicide, a botched suicide, a murder, or a death. There are very few people on the planet I would read that they killed themselves or tried to kill themselves, and I would go, oh, yay. And maybe that's something I find myself struggling with on this song. And then another anonymous comment said, the thing about Laughingstock is that it asks more questions and asks the listeners for some real introspection through just working it out for himself. When you hear about someone or when you yourself do something that you feel is unforgivable and worth cutting off completely, how long does that decision last for? Rejoicing at someone dying, self-inflicted or otherwise, isn't necessarily a healthy way to try to get closure, but then to find out that maybe whatever it was you decided was the last straw was just that person at their worst or most broken. That song is rough. So this song elicits a huge array of emotions, from being like, this is such an awesome rock and roll song, to causing people to consider what their thoughts are about when like someone who's like they consider terrible dies. You know what I mean? Like
Oh
I was
yeah.
remembering like when Osama bin Laden died and stuff like that. Like I was so confused that day in my own personal thoughts, and it was just such a weird experience to see this like reviled person who is, you know, dead, uh and then being like, I don't even know how I feel about this. And so to me there's a lot of questions that the song is asking listeners to consider about how they process the deaths of people that they find to be awful or who have done horrific things, you know.
So I two notes. I agree with everything that's said, and I think that's why the song should have been the 13th song on the album. Maybe not that album, or it could have gone on another album, but I really feel strongly that the song should be on an album just because if you look at all of the comments that came in about it, it's it's a very clearly an important song that resonates with a lot of people. So for it not to get like an actual album treatment, I think is a disservice to the subject. And then just one more note on when you brought up Osama bin Laden. I remember like the comical situation in which I found out about like the capture of Osama bin Laden or whatever. I found like I got that news was broken to me by John Cena while I was watching Monday Night Raw. That's how I found out about it. John Cena.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah. What a weird thing to have mixed feelings about deaths, because whenever I think about deaths of or things like this song, I think about the wide-ranging impacts that the actions of somebody like Clayton Matchey had. I think about the wide-ranging impacts of a person, who does really terrible things. And it's just so confusing to talk about. And that's why I loved that Danik brought up Schadenfreude of, reveling in somebody else's misfortune, because it's so complicated and hard to talk about. Um, but we've got these lyrics. I reveled in the news of your botched suicide. Seemed such fitting fortune that you should die twice. But my sense of vengeance withered and withdrew when I saw what remained ushered into the room. A funhouse reflection of a sadistic, strapping thug that was. So Chris is like super pumped that this guy is going to like face justice for this murder of this teenager when he was sent there as a peacekeeper. And then they like roll this brain damaged person in the room. And Chris is like, he's like trying to stay mad, but he just like falls apart when he sees like this like pitiful and pathetic figure that he says, diapered, deformed, and drooling through a simpering smile, that puerile grin for the camera crew. I mean, it's just like, I really got to hand it to Chris here because I was really like disturbed when I read that first lyric. I reveled in the news of your botched suicide, but then Chris complicates it for me so intensely as a listener and for himself.
He
And that's what's
paints
so
a
good about it.
pretty vivid picture too with the
Yeah,
lyrics.
man. It's hard stuff. So Matchy was declared unfit to stand trial following the suicide attempt. He tried to hang himself after being arrested and suffered serious brain damage. Charges against him were eventually dropped in September of 2008 as his diminished mental capacity meant that he could no longer pose a threat to the public. Um, there are so many articles about this. I read the whole Wikipedia about it. I read some stuff on nationalpost.com about it. I watched interviews with Matchy's wife and fellow soldiers who were there. And it's just it's just a really tragic story, you know. And there was they say the lyric they say you reap what you sow, and sometimes I force myself to rifle through the images, so I believe it too. There's like a reference to the trophy images that Brown, one of Matchy's colleagues, took of Matchy's torture session, which were published by much of the Canadian media. There was a photograph ban on this event until November of 1994, but you can go and find those photos for yourself. And
I don't
it's
recommend it. They're
yeah,
terrible. Like
yeah, yeah. So for musically, I mean, the song is great. The intro riff kind of reminds me of the opening to Tertium Non Dater. Um, I really liked watching Beeve play the solo in some of the YouTube videos. The last minute of the song really reminds me of some of like the techie parts on Cop Just Out of Frame. But to me, the real treasure in the musical performance is Todd. Uh, he's clearly the musical star of the song. If you listen carefully, the bass is really wonderful. I find some of the a little bit of the vocals to be not quite nailing the delivery and cadence that really sits with me to create like a really memorable lyrical melodic approach. I
which
remember,
maybe is kind of what Chris was talking about when Chris talked about the recording of the song.
yeah, like I don't love the way that the song Laughing Stock is delivered before the solo at the end of the song. Like I just don't love the delivery, and like that includes like the ending line. Like when Todd was telling me about when he was writing the song The Days You Hate Yourself, which eventually morphed into Rattan Kane. Todd was telling me the story about how he was like trying to figure out why he didn't feel like the lyrics and the vocal delivery were right. And I'm wondering if that's one of this as well, because the vocal melody just doesn't seem quite there. The delivery of the line laughing stock, where Chris is like laughing stock, like it just doesn't, it's clunky to me a little bit. So I'm wondering if they had any issues with the vocal delivery for the tune.
Yeah, I mean, that not that it happens very frequently or everything, but this is one that I would love for them to maybe re-record or something in the future just to give it the what it deserves.
Yeah, yeah. Um, do you have any other thoughts on the music or the lyrics or anything like this on this tune?
I mean, it's a rocking song. Like the music is good. I like it a lot. I mean, not I don't want to. I don't need to add anything more than what you talked about. And I mean, like to me, where the thing that stands out most about the song, like, is the subject matter and how it's approached in the song.
Hmm.
And you know, I stand firm with what I said that I think it deserves more.
Yeah, I do too. I would even be open to like say they had like 10 new songs for the new record, just redo this one and
Yeah.
put it out again. Like put it on a record so that it actually gets the attention of the full length package. So I wouldn't mind hearing a slightly tweaked version if Chris could figure out ways to smooth out the stuff that he wasn't fully satisfied with in the last session. I would like to hear a slightly updated version to see if there was any ways that they could address the stuff that didn't really nail it for them the first time around.
And I'm curious if he were to re-record it today, would he change anything lyrically?
Yeah, yeah, that's one of the things that I really admire about what Chris talks about on Patreon is where he revisits and revises some of the stuff that he's put out in the past. So I'd be curious as well if there was any revision. But yeah, to me the song it's just a tragedy. It just shows how normal people have all the capability of becoming something pretty disgusting. This song is very hard stuff. I don't love listening to this song. It's one of those ones that makes me like uncomfortable because it asks me to question how I feel about people who have done terrible things, but like that and how they do or do not face accountability.
Which is
Um,
exactly why it's an important song because
yeah,
it should make you uncomfortable.
yeah, and it does. It really does. I was uncomfortable reading about peacekeepers who become murderers. You know what I mean? And I was uncomfortable listening to all the interviews where people just blame the medication for making these people do terrible, terrible things. It was all uncomfortable. The entire process of learning about this song, I enjoyed virtually none of it. And it's just kind of relief to have this conversation now, like coming to a close, honestly. Um, I've been
Yeah, like
procrastinating this song for years.
and when you told me it was next up on the docket for us, I was like, ugh, man, this one's gonna and like we're recording this, it's what, 10:26 on a Saturday morning, and I'm like, man, we're really set the tone for the day.
Yeah, well, fortunately it's sunny outside and we'll go out and we'll kind of shake off this funk after this. But this song describes a tragedy of death, murder, torture in a place that people who got sent there by the government and military, the people who went there likely had very little understanding of the complexity of the famine and the political unrest and the situation on the ground. Um, and tragic endings happened. And everybody's going to have their own feelings about that. Everybody can go and watch, like I said, all that stuff on YouTube is all easily findable. If you just search for Clayton Matchey and the Somalia affair, you can watch tons of stuff for yourself. But I don't really feel the need to go too much more into to depth about it. But I'm glad that the song exists. And I gotta to close the episode. I'll put in a live performance of the band performing this song live in 2014. Um, just to put in a little bit more. But any other closing thoughts on this tune or anything you want to suggest to listeners?
I suggest for the listeners, like, yeah, obviously, listen to the song again and just read up on it. Like, don't look at the pictures, but like read up on it because it's a very interesting story because it's kind of still being told
Mm,
to a certain extent. Like, and I don't know if it'll ever stop. Like the impacts of this story affected like the entire trajectory of the Canadian military. Like they permanently lost 25% of their budget after this.
Wow.
Like it it complete and like they disbanded the entire branch of military that went to do this peacekeeping mission. Like
Wow.
it was pretty huge, the ramifications of this. So definitely like read up on the story if you can. There's a lot, like Greg said, there's a lot of articles out there. It's a really important thing, and you know, that people just need to be aware of. Like, so
Yeah.
yeah, that's where I sit with it.
Cool. Well, do you have a rating for this song if you had to rank it out of 5?
If I had to rank it out of 5, I would rank it 3.5 Hannah biceps out of 5.
Sweet. I think I'm gonna go with 3, and I don't really have a reason. It's just a total gut instinct. And as everybody knows, our ratings mean nothing. But yeah, Steve, I'm glad that we got to hang and chat a little bit. We'll probably do a slightly less intense song for the next episode in a month or whatever.
I can't wait.
But we will we thank everybody for who is still listening to the podcast. Means a ton. I've got a lot of deluxe episodes out now and we thought the nation states were a bad idea. Without Love, Bangers Embrace, and Ska Sucks, where I've compiled a lot of stuff for songs that we've covered in various places into one spot. So if anybody's looking to for some places to start for the podcast, I would definitely recommend some of those deluxe edition episodes we've done recently too. As always, thank you so much for listening, and you can email us at propagandipod@gmail.com. If you want to write to me and request a link for our Discord server and come hang out, that would be fabulous.
You can hear such things as talking about the start of the CFL season this week, or what has been another highlight of the Discord recently?
We've got a mental health channel, which is delightful. We have a reading channel. We talk about the NFL sometimes. We have a place for people to post their own music or their own artwork.
We have a
it's
local
lovely
scenes
place.
section, and the local scenes have been posting a whole bunch of old show flyers from like Montreal from back in the day. Like I have probably like a couple hundred of them, and I have stories to go along with each. So I've been sharing a lot of those in there. It's a wonderful place, the Discord. Highly recommend it. Just a bunch of solid people just helping each other out in there. It's a really amazing community.
Got it. Love it. Come join us on Discord. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
when a band has a new song, that's what it should fucking sound like, right?